Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, today's video is going to touch on the new Rogal Dorn battle tank, which is coming to the game later in January as the latest raid boss. The Rogal Dorn battle tank is a heavily armoured tank used by the Astra Militarum to smash through enemy positions and anchor defensive lines. Named after the Imperial Fist Primarch, the Rogal Dorn tank is translated in-game as a durable boss, which lays down large area of effect attacks to punish your movement and advances. I'll take a deep dive in this video and show you all of his abilities in depth before walking you through some tips on how to manipulate the boss logic to your advantage. This is my usual deep dive on a boss, and you're going to want to watch through to the end for all the tips and tricks that will give you a head start on the upcoming boss. I'm also going to take a look at how the guild raid ladder and scaling changes with the addition of Epic and Legendary 5 to give you an idea of how much harder things will be. Timestamped as usual, so enjoy! We can start off by taking a general look at the Rogal Dorn boss. Here's some footage with both primes already killed, and you can see its stats for Legendary 1. The key things to point out here are the traits. Immune and Big Target are recognized boss traits, but the main one worth paying attention to for this video is the vehicle trait. The maps that have been designed for this boss have a lot of trenches and bridges, fitting an Astra Militarum themed battleground. Vehicles can move over trenches, but not end their turn on them, and this will be relevant as we explore the tank's abilities shortly. I'll quickly scroll through the abilities for the boss, but don't worry if you don't catch them, because we're going to take a deep look at everything in turn. The spawned adds here are Arcadian Guardsmen and the Mortar Team, both of which you'll see and be familiar with through other game modes. The Rogal Dorn battle tank only has two active abilities, Pound Them to Dust and Gunner's Kill on Sight. There are three passives, Armoured Might, Ablative Plating and Weaker Rear Armour. We'll start by looking at the passives. Armoured Might causes the battle tank to do melta damage to any units that are in front of its movement and pushing them aside. Summons and units that cannot be displaced, so we're talking about big targets like Revas, will instantly die. The key thing to point out here, as you'll notice through the gameplay footage, is that this can be applied multiple times in one turn. In this clip, Aethana and Calandis are much closer to the tank and suffer from multiple procs of this ability. Hopefully the frames are slow enough that you can see the multiple hits being triggered for both characters. The next passive is Ablative Plating. This is essentially a souped up version of the Gravis armor trait that characters like Bellator already have. It requires any incoming damage that comes in to pass through an armor check 3 times unless the attack has a pierce ratio of 60% or greater, or the attack is a crit. In this clip on screen you can see the vastly different amounts of damage that are forecast for characters like Tiark, who does 20 damage on mouse over compared to other characters with high pierce.
Wait, I'm telling you why I'm ready. Okay, go ahead.
However, when Tiark crits, we can see that he does several thousand damage rather than 20, demonstrating the nuance here. The tooltip mentions a cutoff for 60% to ignore his passive ability. Immospec's attack has exactly 60% pierce, and he does full damage. Ra, at 55%, falls under the threshold to ignore this passive unless he crits. Aethana buffing crit chance is invaluable on this boss, and I think she may be the single most important character to bring along, but we'll come more onto this later on. The final passive ability is Weaker Rear Armour. When the primes are killed, this gives your units in the rear arc of Rogal Dorn a 50% bonus crit chance. Characters in the game have anywhere from 35 to 65% base critical hit chance, and you can get this up to or even over 100% if you put them in the rear arc. Aethana's additional 20% crit chance through her passive again is another means of raising this bonus to a guaranteed crit. The gameplay interface here is pretty friendly. Simply select one of your units and a green glowing rear arc is visible, so you know where to position your characters to take advantage of this. We can move on to the active abilities next. I'm just going to demonstrate them in action before going into more depth later on and sharing what behaviours and logic I've learned about them, so you can pseudo-manipulate how and when the bosses use these skills. The first of these two abilities is Gunner's Kill on Sight. This marks an area in front of the battle tank. Whenever a unit without infiltrate moves onto or out of a marked hex, this then triggers a salvo of damage from the battle tank. Doing 2 critical hits causes this ability to shut off. If you don't kill the primes, then you will require 3 critical hits to turn the ability off instead. What you'll see on clip is that this ability does not trigger when Shadowsun moves off the marked hex due to her infiltrate trait. However, it can trigger multiple times in one turn, as seen when both Ra and Eldryon move off the marked hexes. The second ability is called Pound Them to Dust. I've chosen another map to demonstrate this skill, and I quite enjoy this map for its unique terrain feature in the middle. The thing to demonstrate here is that there is some easily missed text. The boss will only use this ability if it is able to do a ranged attack. The boss has a range of 4 on its attack, so on the first turn when it moves up into the top left corner of the map, it doesn't take an action because there are no enemies within range. When the boss then turns and comes down the map and finds our squad within range, it starts using this active ability. This starts with a ranged attack followed by an area of effect highlighted area. Rogal Dorn does delayed damage to this highlighted area after one turn. Now that I've demonstrated the basics, I want to show you some more nuanced stuff that will factor into your gameplay and decision making. We'll start off with kill on sight. We know that the boss always tries to move forward if there are hexes available. It will then use the kill on sight ability to try and capture as many enemies as possible. Here we can see that by stacking our units on different sides, we can affect which side the Rogal Dorn tank boss turns and consequently set up to attack its rear. In the next series of clips, we can see the next bit of behaviour. We can encourage and repeat the boss to do the same thing every time through our unit positioning, but on turn 4, by slightly adjusting the number of units we have in his field of fire, we can affect what skill he uses. What we're demonstrating here is that if the boss has at least 2 units in the field of fire, he will use kill on sight. If there is only 1 unit, as seen on the clip on the far right, then he uses the other active ability, Pound Them into Dust. These clips also pretty clearly illustrate how far the arcs or firing fields are for this ability. They stretch 3 hexes in all directions from the front arc, from the middle turret as well as the side guns. Rogal Dorn can never fire this ability behind him, so if you pay attention to which way the body of the tank is facing, you'll know where he is going to fire. The final clips take us back to the map with the interesting terrain feature. We tuck all of our Tau into the trenches and note that the battle tank cannot end its turn over the trench. It can start in front of the trenches and drive over them, but never end its turn on one. We can see here how that causes Rayvas to die as a result of Armoured Might, but the rest of the Tau are safe and benefiting from the damage reduction of the trenches. Next up, I have 2 teams that I wanted to showcase here, my favourite team to use, bearing in mind I've only really had this test build for about 24 hours, the majority of which have been spent at work or asleep. Janezar shines because of her active ability to clear a bunch of adds, but also due to her high mobility, infiltrate, and high pierce. Eldryon is still king because multi-hits aren't really penalised by this boss, and Eldryon is the multi-hit king. I really like Moghan Ra too, despite only having 55 pierce through his heavy damage type. He gets a bonus critical chance from lots of different places, works well with the Eldari, and if you can manipulate the boss movements, his passive will also give you bonus crit damage whenever he crits, allowing him to really shine here. And yes, that is Shadowsun. It looks like she may have finally found a place to be used. She has infiltrate, high pierce, and her passive can provide Ra with a slight damage boost. As you'll see in this clip, her active ability lets her reposition fairly easily to trigger bonus crits from the rear arc. The team on the right shows a cool interaction that was shared with me by Labonti, an ambassador friend of mine that worked with me on this video. Neurothrope has a passive ability called Neuroparasite that increases in power after the target takes psychic damage or would be suppressed. The mortars on this map cause suppression damage through their attacks, and if you can line the strategy up and leave the mortars alive, the mortars will attack your melee units and splash onto Rogal Dorn, thereby increasing the Neuroparasite count. It'll probably take some pretty high level thinking and strategizing to maximize this comp, if it's viable, but I'm just showing you a cool interaction. We can now move on and talk about the 2 primes that fight alongside Rogal Dorn. We have Sybil Divine and Thaddeus Noble as the prime bosses. Before we look at them individually, I have summarized here the benefits of killing them both. You can make weak rear armor more potent and reduce the number of crits required to dissipate kill on sight by 1. You can also reduce the number of summoned Cadian guardsmen by 4, so taking the total from 8 to 4, as well as the number of mortar teams from 3 to 2. There are also some reductions in the boss's damage and armor values. Sybil Divine retains the active and passive abilities from her character in-game. She also has a bonus unique passive called Reinforcements. This causes her to summon 6 Cadian Guardsmen at the start of each of her turns. Killing these Guardsmen causes Sybil to lose an extra small portion of her health. You'll note from this gameplay clip with a Tau that the Cadian Vox casters also summon Cadian Guardsmen. However, killing these Cadian Guardsmen doesn't seem to trigger Sybil's passive. Whether this is a bug or by design is unclear, but both groups of summons are called Cadian Guardsmen, so it's slightly confusing. This fight feels a lot like the Corodius fight, where you want to kill a bunch of Guardsmen off and then also deal damage to the Prime. Ulf shines here, and you can also use the Adeptus Sororitas and manipulate their Act of Faith passive ability to allow you to do massive final damage against the boss with a character like Morven Vale or similar. Similarly, Thaddeus Noble retains his own abilities from his character in-game, but also gains a unique one as seen on screen. Fields of Fire gives friendly units with emplacement, so we're talking about las cannon and mortar teams, bonus damage. Stunning Thaddeus or dealing melee damage to him not only does bonus damage to him, but also shuts the special ability off, incentivizing you to bring mobile melee characters or someone like Arjak who can deep strike and stun Thaddeus. Let's cycle back now to Rogal Dorn and summarize the gameplay tips that I've demonstrated for you. Having at least 2 units in the weapon arc will cause him to use Gunner's Kill on Sight. Otherwise, he will use Pound into Dust at every opportunity. Also, the turret can turn and fire 360 degrees. However, once the tank is on a path, it won't turn until it reaches the end of that path. This allows you to predict where it's going and set up your characters accordingly. This is especially important for characters like Moggan Ra who benefit from clever placement with their heavy weapon trait. There is some room for theory crafting with a Neurothrope as previously mentioned, but I would avoid bringing summoned units as they can cause multiple procs of Gunner's Kill on Sight. In terms of characters who at first glance might seem good here, I like those shown on screen. It looks like the Eldari have solidified their place as the most powerful faction in the game, marrying with their tabletop dominance. Aethana, I think, will be the most important character in the game against this boss by a considerable margin due to her fantastic mobility and ability to confer a bonus critical hit chance to allies. This boss is also all about fishing for crits, so Aethana makes your life so much easier. Jane Zar also shines due to her high damage, infiltrate, and active ability that clears summons, and no matter what you do in terms of killing both primes, you'll always be left with at least 6 summons to battle through. Right, so that's a relatively deep dive into the boss, and I hope that was useful and insightful. I also want to show you quickly what the Legendary 5 bosses will look like, and Tawin has helpfully helped me calculate some information that I will be able to share with you in table form to lend some insight into how things have scaled. Firstly, here's a visual representation of the tougher things that lie ahead. L5 Gazgul looks to have about 12.5 million health. We can jump into one of the boss primes and see that Gibbascraps has 1 million health too. The units on the map are scaled to Diamond 3, but I want you to pay close attention to Snapareka, who has almost 30,000 health. This is absolutely crazy levels of health, and Gibbascraps himself also has 3.5 thousand armor. Now, bear in mind this is all a test build and subject to change, but it gives you a flavour of the scaling to come in the next raid season. On this slide, you can see how the old and new guild boss models compare. HP obviously represents the boss health. The title Scaling represents the mathematical model by which ability damage and armor is scaled. Legendary 4 reaches 99.7, which is effectively max armor and damage. With the new model, we can see that effectively Epic 5 is the old Legendary 1. The scaling remains the same, but the boss HP is reduced. And that's the end of where things are easier. Every subsequent boss retains the same level of scaling, but health increases significantly. The scaling caps out at the same amount though, so 99.7 for anything that is Legendary 3 or above. So if your units are surviving and dealing damage to the old system Legendary 4 bosses, then they will still do the same to the new model, but overall HP is much higher, so we'll see fewer cycles or fewer clears of bosses, particularly at the highest stages. Now you might be saying, hang on a second Nandi, didn't you just show me footage of Gazgul at L5 with only 12.5 million health? Yes, astute viewer, I did, but that is because Ghazghkull has 20% less health than all of the other guild bosses. So, sorry that's been long for my usual standards of video, but I've tried to ram it full of useful information. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I have to once again give a big thanks and shout out to my collaborators for this video, Ambassadors Labonte and Tawan. I've only had this test build for a day, so this wouldn't have been so comprehensive and insightful without you. I'll sign off here with two things. If you are a newer player who hasn't used their referral code, I would love if you could consider entering mine as shown on screen. It earns you 100 blackstone and supports me in the work that I do. It is single use though, so choose who you support carefully. Finally, if you're interested in joining me in the Eye of Terror cluster, feel free to drop by our Discord via server link below. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi.